Welcome to the MuseCast, where we squeeze every last drop of inspiration out of Sunday's sermon.
Okay, never fails. For some reason, we start recording and I start laughing. So there you go. Okay, welcome. Happy Tuesday, everyone. It's the MuseCast. And look, our friend Osheta is back. All is right with the world. We've got Dan Kent, Osheta Moore, and I'm Shawna, Boren. And it's a little warm here in Minnesota, and I'm not complaining. I am from the South, so I understand heat and warmth, but woo, it's a little warm for up here. Hence my, it looks like my hair is blowing in the wind. It's a fan because I'm so stinking hot in my office. So leads me to the question, what is your favorite way to cool off when it's really, really warm and muggy and humid and hot?
Well, that's a good question. Well, my favorite way that I don't do as much as I would like to is ice cream. You get to a certain age, you can't do that every time you're warm. But lately I've been doing fruit smoothies, and that is great. That's a great way to cool off from the inside out.
Yeah. So my pawpaw had ice cream every night before bed, but he also had sugar diabetes. So I would not recommend that, Dan. You need to refrain. Rest in peace, pawpaw. But yeah. Okay. How about you, Osheta?
My daughter has been nannying for 2 families, and this, as soon as we're done doing this, I'm taking them to the lake. And I'm probably not going to spend a ton of time in the water, but there's something about being close to the water that helps me feel a little bit cooler. So, and then I'll probably have an iced coffee while I sit and read. So that's what I do. And it's really, really, other than just growing in my deeply air conditioned home.
Well, exactly.
Yeah, I'm from the South.
Yeah, sometimes that's all you can do.
Yeah.
I remember in Texas, that was it. You either were in water or you were trying to get into the coldest AC possible because it was just so hot. I agree. I love water. Even if it's just having my feet in the water or my legs in the water, or kind of sitting close to shore, that's always lovely.
Yeah.
Or, it's just I have this little portable fan that is amazing, that I kind of have with me wherever, because it's battery powered. Is that bad to say that it's battery powered as we're going to be talking about the earth?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, but it's great. It's great. I love it. It has a cute little remote so I can control it, from anywhere. And fantastic. Oh, I'm so sorry, you guys. That looks weird, but it is what it is. I'm hot. I don't care. All right.
I think it looks great. It's like the MuseCast on MTV is what it is. That's sort
right,
of.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. How many of our viewers though remember MTV? I talk about MTV to my kids and they're like, what?
Oh my goodness.
Oh my
That's
Lord.
Funny.
What would be? Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, because you can just get everything streamed now.
Right.
Anyway, okay,
right.
we're digressing. We're showing our age. This past weekend, we're still in cross-examination, which is awesome. We talked about fake news, which is lovely. Greg is super fit, which is holy buckets. So Dan, you're going to have a summary. We're going to have some thoughts. Today's nugget is going to be brought to us solely by Osheta Moore, and it's going to be really a great reflection. So let's get started.
Yeah. So we are still in the cross-examination series, and this is probably going to end up going a lot longer than we had planned, I should say, because we're probably going to go for a while, because we're about to move into a whole different level of cross-examination, and Greg is still sort of laying the groundwork and given some of the fundamental aspects of his thought and our kind of collective kind of ideas on this. And so this week he looked at fake news, and really by that, and I just love that title because it's hip now with it. Wow, it's sort of culturally relevant, and but he's applying it to Genesis 3, where the serpent deceives Eve with this lie, or in other words, fake news, and so what Greg is saying is that the fake news that deceived Eve it's the same fake news. It's the same lie that deceives us all, that we all buy into, and that shapes how we look at the world, how we look at ourselves, how we look at God, how we look at each other. And so he breaks this down, and there's so much that Greg talks about in here, besides his yoga and his exercise, but just the content itself, the sermon itself. I can't get to it all, but I keep coming back to this structure that Greg has for this sermon, which I thought was just really, really helpful. He just talks about there are these 4 kind of fundamental lies that we're all vulnerable to, and we kind of, the antidote to those 4 lies are these 4 key truths. And so the 4 lies, the first one is this lie about God, that the serpent convinces Eve that God cannot be trusted. So the truth there is that no, God can be trusted. He's not deceptive. In fact, to understand what God is really like, we can look at God's, just overflowing love as demonstrated by Christ on the cross. And so that's the first lie. That's the corresponding truth. The second lie is about Eve. And here the serpent is trying to tell Eve that God is selling you short, that you can be so much more than this, and you can be your own God, basically. And that's the lie that Eve sort of buys. The corresponding truth to that is that really we get our fullest life when we center ourselves on God. And when we center ourselves on God, then our center sort of becomes a center of celebration, a center of agape love. But when we have something else at the center other than God, then our center becomes a center of desperation, and we become hungry, and we try to fill that desperation. And that is sort of an endless sort of hunger. It never dies off, because it's only meant to be filled with God. And this all leads to lies about others, because when we are trying to establish ourselves, in trying to feed that impossible hunger, we tend to do that relative to others. And so our relationship with others tends to become competitive and hierarchical. And so we tend to view others as a means to an end. What does this person do for me? And how I always hear it is people will say, surround yourself with like-minded people and things like that. In other words, surround yourself with people who feed you, who affirm you or reinforce what you want. And so we kind of view people as objects. The truth is that no, each person, everyone, whether they agree with you or not, has this profound intrinsic worth and this unsurpassable love of God, that everyone that you meet is worth Jesus dying for. That is the corresponding truth. And then finally, in that same way that we have this hunger that leads us to view others as objects that either help us or hurt us, we also extend that to the earth and the animal kingdom. And we look at creation as basically a product for our disposal. And so we tend to mistreat God's world. And we were given this original sort of job to take care of the earth and to caretake the animals. And instead, we have just used them as products, and we have abused the earth. And it's not quite clear how much more of that the earth can handle. The corresponding truth to that is that no, God cares about the earth in and of itself, not just for what it can do for us, but God loves animals and God loves creation. Just in and of itself, it has intrinsic value and intrinsic worth. And then he finished with this really haunting verse in Revelations 11, where it says the time will come when God will destroy those who destroy the earth. God cares about the creation and the animals, regardless of how it serves us. In and of itself, God cares about it, and it's very serious to God. And I think that is a great warning. And then Greg sort of wraps up the sermon by looking at GAP again. Get all of your life from Christ. Agree with God that everyone you meet is worth Christ dying for. Pray for your enemies. But then this week we added S, which is be stewards of the earth and the animal kingdom. And so that's my summary, and there's a ton that was missing there, but a really great sermon, and just a fundamental teaching that I think will serve as a good foundation as we go forward. What did you guys think?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I want to first, before we get into any of our thoughts, I want to back up for a moment, because I know there are people that are like, wait a second, we're supposed to be in Sermon on the Mount, and we understood that that's going to take some time. And you say we're still in that series. However, why are we spending so much time in Genesis 3? So can you connect those dots for folks?
Yeah, that's a good question. Matthew 7 is kind of the judgment text that we're looking at. But when you look at when Jesus says, "Do not judge," well, the question is why do we judge? And the answer to that can be found at its core, what we find in Genesis 3. The reason why we judge is because we live out of this state of insecurity, and judgment sort of emerges out of insecurity. And if we have God at our center, that sort of secures us in a way that compulsion to judge sort of disappears. In fact, I was talking to Greg and Paul earlier this week, and I was thinking about justice, like our desire for justice, our desire for social justice and all of that. And I feel like part of our urge to judge is because we want justice. And I feel like judgment a lot of times can be a shortcut for that. And that all comes back to that insecurity that we have when we don't have God at the center. And so those are some of the ideas that we're kicking around. So we're really looking for the root of what causes the things that Jesus is concerned about in Matthew 7. Does that answer it? I felt like I kind of went all over the place on that. But.
Yeah, the only thing I would change is I would say the root of.
What did I say? Did I say root?
You said rut.
Y'all say rut.
Yeah, like the church where my husband and I pastor is roots, not ruts.
Yes, not ruts. But that's a very Minnesota thing I've discovered.
There is a technical issue on Zoom. I think that's what it was. I don't think it was.
Oh, we are going to get into a bit more of a discussion about how practically we can care for the earth and the animal kingdom. And I do have a question regarding that will lead us into that discussion. But first, Osheta, I want to give you an opportunity. Is there anything from what Dan said or that you heard from Greg that you want to expound upon before we get into some of that other stuff?
I was really grateful to hear Greg identify Eve's journey or Eve's story as paradigmatic for like, this is how we all interact with God. This is like, because I think it was such a beautiful course correction, because oftentimes when we hear, when Eve is brought up, it's, women, you struggle with this, or like Eve brought in the original, and it's like really hones in on her gender and genderizes the conversation in a way that's not helpful for all of us to find, to identify the fake news we believe and to believe and explore the truth. So I appreciated that Greg did that, because that was just liberating for all of us to be like, oh, yeah, we can find, like, now, if you have not read the Genesis narrative as finding yourself in both Adam and Eve and like the ways that you relate to God and relate to the earth and relate to each other, Greg saying that one thing allowed us to enter into that story and then track a little bit more. It's like, oh, where do I believe those lies? And then what are the truths that I should be living into? So.
Yeah, that was like I don't even know if he realizes what a moment of freedom that was.
Yeah.
A lie about Eve is a lie about all of us.
Right.
And it's not about gender, because so many times it's been women, you see what happened. It was woman who, and I'm just, it was really beautifully stated. It was simplistic, but also one of those moments.
Yeah.
That's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. I the gender aspect to it, that implies that the serpent went after Eve because of her gender, and I just don't think that's the case. When I look at it, what I think is interesting is that when God gave the warning, Eve wasn't even around yet. Eve didn't even exist yet, and so it's just Adam. And so Adam is the one who received the warning, and Eve wasn't even there. That's why the serpent went to Eve, is because she's just getting all this secondhand from Adam, if you follow the story kind of, more literally. And then the second piece is, you see that is she says that we are told that we cannot eat or even touch it or we will die. Well, God doesn't say to Adam that you can't touch it. That's just, she doesn't know exactly what the ruling is, and that's the vulnerability that the serpent exploits, not her gender. And so I agree with Osheta. I think it's great to reframe that.
And I also think that like, even you just saying that makes me question, how often do I perceive something about God and like some of it's true and some of it's not, and how deeply important it is to have community to say that's not like you're tracking on this part of like, yes, Jesus died on the cross, but it wasn't like God pouring out his wrath or whatever, like things that we have because of different theology and different experiences, we kind of have these amalgamation of like what's true and what's not, and we don't see it for what it is. And so I think that just even in that, hearing the way you talk about Eve processing with the serpent, it's like, oh gee, where are the areas that I'm like, I believe this about God, I also believe this thing about God, and where do I need my community to help me decipher like, yep, that is true, and that's something you added on because of your own ignorance or your own trauma or whatever else.
That's
Which
good.
Is also interesting. Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say it's also interesting because to me it's kind of a play on when the serpent is like, did God really say? Well, actually, no, he didn't say.
Right.
That was her interpretation of what was said, but no, that's not what he said. So that's really intriguing.
Yeah.
Well, and definitely community. I think that's so right. And that's something that I'm learning more and more and more in my faith, is just the important role of community. I mean, we were in the MuseCast here for 5 minutes and I already learned that I'm saying roots wrong. So, I mean, look at, it's like this revelation amplifier. It's this truth amplifier. So,
Yeah. And so like, what would the Genesis narrative look like if Eve had gone back to Adam and was like, this thing happened, And so that is a challenge I've taken from the reading and from Greg's sermon, is like, be critical of those things that I believe and be willing to have them exposed and explored.
That's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, the way I look at that too is, and the way it has challenged me personally, is to recognize we all have vulnerabilities. We all have blind spots. And without other people in our life to help us see what we're not seeing, or maybe even shine a light on like a vulnerability and help come in and fill that gap or be a strength for us, we're left exposed, and that's a dangerous place to be.
Right. Yeah. And so going back to that whole thing of judgment, like you were talking about, Dan, I think judgment is really comforting for a lot of people because you're not required to have humility to let other people check your judgment call. And so I think even going back to that, like, the being in community requires a humility to say, I don't have it all figured out. And if you are going to make a judgment call about somebody, like I also appreciated when Greg was like, in love, like if you disagree with somebody, like you can disagree in love. But there's no loving kind of impetus or motivation when you're just ready to make a snap judgment. And I think that's right. Eve eating the fruit, she made a snap decision. She made a snap judgment of who God is and what the next step should be for her and Adam.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also wonder if that plays into, because we've been talking about love and judgment for so many weeks, and we are consistently coming up against questions of, but what about this situation? Isn't it right for me to judge here? What about, I also wonder if that plays into it, because maybe there are other areas in which we need to be checked about how we're perceiving and therefore judging other people and things. And so we want to go to the least common, like, well, surely you wouldn't argue with this. This I could surely judge. I think we're just so grappling for that validation, vindication. I mean, fill in the blank to say that we're okay. Yeah. Which tends to that desperation a little bit.
Well, I had a conversation with somebody this morning who was asking me about that, like, judgment piece of, like, in terms of justice, when something is wrong, shouldn't you say it's wrong and shouldn't you act toward it being wrong? And I was like, totally. There's a place for activism. There's a place for being justice seekers. But I have learned I've learned to do contemplative activism, where, like, I'm really, like, paying attention to who God says I am. I'm grounded in my identity in Christ. I get my worth from Christ. So I don't get my worth from my activism. And then what I sense from my time with God and prayer and discernment, then I move towards some active activism. But even in doing that, like a protest or whatever, even in those spaces, I want to reflect the love of Jesus because that's what I'm rooted and grounded in. I think that's what we heard Greg invite us into, is that moving through the world in that rooted, grounded place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Greg spent quite a bit of time of talking about our first mandate to care for the earth and the animal kingdom. And then, like Dan said, he read that like chilling verse from Revelation that I don't even honestly want to think about. Oh my word. But I know that each of us in this space, the three of us, have talked about ways in which we have felt led to tend to the earth and the animal kingdom. But my question for you guys to get that conversation going is this. There are so many within certain evangelical circles that don't really see that as our, if it was our first mandate, it's surely not our mandate now because we're so far from that. And also we are told that there's going to be a new heaven and a new earth established. So what even is the point? And are we just falling into the liberal agenda is usually the way it comes back. Right. And so I wanted to give you both an opportunity to speak to that.
Well, I'll start. I'll say that, I do think that first mandate still applies to us because God still loves his creation and God still loves his creatures. But the caveat I'd say that against the liberal agenda stuff is that, we've always needed God's intervention for creation. There's a lot of kind of fear mongering, and some of it I think very justified, about like what is happening with the earth, what's happening with the melting ice caps and the permafrost and the methane buildup under the earth, which could wipe out people. And there's a lot of things to potentially be afraid of. And so there's this desire to kind of fight to protect those things to protect ourselves. But even if those things weren't there, and even if we all became, as progressive as possible, and nobody used any plastics, and we got rid of all fossil fuel burning things, and we just lived, I don't know what that would look like. But we would still need God's intervention because we live in a universe that is slowly losing energy. And at some point, the universe will end in heat death, where there is no life and there's no energy. And so no matter what, we need God. And so God's not asking us to take care of the earth and the animal kingdom because he wants us to save it. Although I think he would like us to save animals and he'd like us to save the earth, but that's not why. He wants us to do that because he's made these things good. He loves these things, and he's trying to build up a people that are stewards, because if it's true that we are going to be in eternal fellowship with God and his creation, he needs people who can do the job eternally. So the new earth isn't necessarily to fix the problems that we caused. It's a new earth in that it's an eternal earth. It's an eternal creation that won't experience the heat death. And I think that what God is calling us to is he's calling for people who are compatible with that kind of creation, who can take care of creation. And so that's why when I hear, God loves creation, he wants me to love creation just because creation is good, not because I'm going to try to save the earth, because I can barely even manage my checking account, let alone saving the earth. So, but I can orient my heart in that right way. And so I do my best out of a sense of duty, not because I have any grandiose ideas that I'm going to save the earth or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Dan. Thank you. Osheta?
I would also say, coming back to the justice piece. So oftentimes, when I am speaking to somebody who is hesitant to embrace creation care as a part of our discipleship, these are often people who have a tremendous amount of empathy and tenderness and compassion for the suffering of others, particularly in other parts of the world. They give to organizations that do international ministry and care. And oftentimes the water crisis is one of those things that comes up in that conversation. And so when I talk about our invitation into creation care, I talk about it as part of the reason why our neighbors in other parts of the world are having to walk miles to get water. It's not just because of broken, corrupt government and systems, but also because creation is suffering because
Yep.
they're experiencing drought, because the farming techniques that have always worked for them for hundreds of years that they've passed on from generation to generation are no longer working because the ground is not responding the same way because of toxins in the earth. Like, it's a cyclical thing. And so humans like are other people who are made in God's image. So if it's a bridge too far to care about the earth and the animals, which we should, and I fully love what Dan just shared about, like, God is calling us to partner with God to love the things that God loves. But like, if we believe that we have an unsurpassable worth, and we believe others have unsurpassable worth, and their lived experience is affected because of the creation, because of climate issues, then maybe let that be your on-ramp into it. Like, to recognize that it is cyclical. Like, what happens to the earth happens to humans too.
Yeah, that
That's
is
good.
so good. I think back, do you guys remember at the start of the pandemic when things were just shut down and people weren't going places? Do you remember how people were posting all these pictures of bluer skies and animals out and about that just had, like, birds and just that just hadn't been out, and just everything just seems that like people could breathe better, the air was clearer. I mean, we all saw it. So that's not something that we should just poo-poo. But I'm going to talk from a standpoint of a feeler and just say, whenever, with my husband or our children, if something's important to them, guess what? Because I love them, it's also important to me. If something's important to them, I don't disregard it. I don't I actually investigate, why is it important to them, and how can I also lend and orient my heart, like you said, Dan, to what matters to them. And as a child of God, I love God, and what is important to him should be important to me. And so again, I can't save the earth, no, but I can orient my heart to care for things that God cares about, and to just try to steward well the things that he puts in my path. Why would I want to trash things that he created? Like, creation is a beautiful thing. And I don't think it's political. Creation is creation, and it's something that God deeply cares about. And so therefore I should care about it. And I do care about it. I can't do everything, but I can do what comes into my path and what I feel led to pay attention to. I think that's important.
And I think even on like a deeply human, and like, this is such like a surface kind of response, but like, have you ever worked really hard on something? Like, you've cleaned something or you put a space together, like, and then somebody just like comes in and like leaves all the cabinets open, or like leaves like trash, or like, and like they enjoyed it, they were in the space, but then like they didn't care for the space. Like, I can think of lots of spaces I put together and I'm just like, okay. And so I just imagine like God on some levels, like, like, I made this for you. And so like, I just tap into that part of myself, and I'm like, well, if I love God enough, I don't want God to be even annoyed on that level, because I know what it's like, like somebody doesn't care about something that I worked really hard on. So
I think really quick, just want to say, it's really tough. And there's so many of the things that we're doing to the earth that is a cumulative thing. And, if you drive to Milwaukee for Thanksgiving, you will see 104 deer carcasses because of the freeway. We have a transportation system. That's how we get from place to place. And we don't have a better way of doing that. And so those are like big decisions. Some countries have animal bridges so animals can go over so they don't get hit by cars. But those are like all big things that I'm not going to be able to go out and build an animal bridge. I'm just not allowed to do that. And so we have to do what we can do. And we're all addicted to convenience, and we're all addicted to the things that are destroying the earth. And so I think we have to have mercy on ourselves as we try to do our best and try to reorient our hearts and have mercy on one another as well. But it is important, and I think it's important to God. And we can't let the size of the job, the size of the destruction, and the size of the task discourage us from just doing what we can do. But we have to do that with love and with mercy, I think.
Amen. Really, really well said, Dan. I think it'd be helpful because some people may be watching and they're just like, okay, so where do I start? And I think it would be helpful, people just heard just some practical ways. Again, this isn't an exhaustive list, and it's not exhaustive. Therefore, there are many other ways in which you can start. But let's just give people just a couple of things from our own life that we have felt led to do to start to move in this direction, to orient our heart to be better stewards of the earth and animal kingdom. Dan, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. A couple of quick things. Plastic bags is the big one. Like I remember getting in an argument with a lady at the checkout person at Target because she wanted to give me a plastic bag for my toothpaste and my pack of gum. It's like, well, I can just carry that. No. Well, she said that's our policy. It's like, well, no, I just took it and I left. But it's like, so they don't do that anymore. But back in the 90s, that was their policy because they wanted to market. They wanted the Target logo all over the place. And so for me, from that point on, I took it as like a personal mission. Like, I'm going to use as few plastic bags as I possibly can because I don't want to be their free marketing. That was my original motivation. Now it's for the environment. But it's amazing. Like, it's so much better to just carry stuff. You've got two arms, you can carry a lot of stuff. And sometimes when you get groceries, you got to have the paper bags and, whatever. But even then I'll do like 2 12 packs of LaCroix and a gallon of milk and a loaf of bread. And, and I'll just carry that, and it's sort of like a fun little personal challenge. And I probably look ridiculous sometimes when there's probably like, an avocado rolling out of my hand or whatever, but it's, so that's one thing. And then the other thing is the less factory farmed meats you can eat, the better, because factory farming is destroying the Amazon and it's creating all sorts of carbon dioxide that is just not necessary. And so the more you can cut down on that, the better. And so yeah, those are the two that come to mind.
Yeah. I find it interesting too, because the plastic bag thing is something that is one of mine as well. And so many organizations now, like I know, like where my son goes to college, they don't do plastic bags. So you have to bring your own bag because they're not going to give you a bag. So they all are now using reusable bags, the college students are. So
that's awesome.
And I agree with the industrial farming and just because I don't eat a meat. I'm a pescatarian, but really I'm a vegetarian because I don't even really eat fish. Like occasionally I'll have shrimp, but anyway, that's not the point. The point is that I feel badly though, because it always, it's cyclical, right? It's really hard to say that as a mandate, and that's not what we're saying, but it's hard when what is available, what is cost effective for so many families is that stuff.
That's right.
And so it's a part of a bigger issue and it's so hard. And so I just wanted to say that because I don't want people to think, oh yes, do your organic grass-fed, blah, blah, blah. Right. Well, it's expensive and it's hard for people. Right. But that's part of the problem. That's part of the problem. It shouldn't be more expensive to be healthy. Like, that's another story for another time. Osheta.
Well, a couple things before so when I forget my bags, which is often, when I forget my bags, I just take my groceries in the cart and I just put them in my back seat in my trunk. And then I like text the family like, hey, I forgot my bags, put them outside, or like bring a bag and come help get stuff out of my car. So there's like, it's not all or nothing. Like, oh, I forgot my bags, I just need to take whatever bag. Like and that's kind of the game that I play with myself of like, can I remember my bags? If not, I'm just loading up my car. And then the other thing I would say in response to what you said about, food insecurity is a real justice issue. And so food and the way we eat is not the only way we can practice creation care. But I remember, like, I had another friend who we would go grocery shopping together. So we would carpool together because I didn't have a car. But I thought that the way we did that was us. We still bought meat. We still bought the groceries we bought. But because we carpooled, like that was just one small way of like being aware of creation. Even though we both could drive separately, we decided to do it together. So even something as simple like that, it just keeps you. It practices and keeps you mindful of that.
Yeah.
So every little thing you do, it's not to fix a problem. It's not to, it's to keep you mindful of God and yourself and where you are in this cycle of shalom. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's good to start by just asking yourself the question, where have I acted in ways in which I am treating things as if they are expendable and just purely there for my pleasure? I think until you ask yourself that question, you may not be aware of the ways in which you act in ways that are destructive versus ways that are more caring and mindful of what God has blessed us with. So just ask yourself that question and see where God leads you.
Right.
Dan, did you have something else? Because if you do, great. But if not, we're going to wrap up this really fun conversation we've been having with Osheta's nuggets.
Yeah, I think we should probably wrap it up because, I don't want to go down a rabbit trail. So let's just wrap it up.
Okay. All right. It's nugget time.
It's nugget. Okay. So I just want to share this resource that has been really helpful for me around creation care. I just want to say this one more thing before I forget. So Casey Davis is somebody that I follow, and she's a mental health expert, but she has this saying that says you can't save the rainforest if you're depressed. And so I just want to recognize that sometimes convenient things are all that you can do when you're in the middle of a mental health crisis. And so I just want to say that. And that's when leaning into community and saying I can't cook for myself. I can either DoorDash or do you think you could bring me something that you may left over? Creating those kind of connections. If you're trying to be mindful of creation care, but you're in a mental health spiral, or maybe even offering that to somebody who struggles with mental health. If you ever feel like you need a DoorDash and you don't want to do that because that pings your creation care conviction, let me know or whatever. So I just want to put that out.
Yeah.
But this book is called Becoming Rooted. It's by Randy Woodley, who's an Indigenous theologian. And part of my journey towards creation care has been learning from Indigenous people because I want to honor the stewardship. So the stewardship is as in the gaps, right, Dan? And so I've been learning from Indigenous people of how they cared for the earth and tended to the earth. And Randy Woodley calls Shalom the harmony way. So living in harmony with God, living in harmony with ourselves, creation, and systems. And so the nugget is just this little devotion. It's super short, but it's called The Harmony Way. And it begins with Desmond Tutu's I Am Because of You. And he says, our Cherokee people have a construct, a way of being we call Elohe. This life way includes our history, culture, law, and aspects of life. One could say that it means the harmony way, but it is so much more. Elohe means the grounding, practice, and abundance the way it should. It means that there's no fighting among each other and that everything is acted as a good relative. Everyone is acting as a good relative. Elohe is knowledge, is knowing the world is in balance and every being is doing their part. Sometimes it's described as Ducati, the right road or good path of balance. Elohe is knowing the importance of community above oneself and your role in it. Other North American tribes have similar understandings of the harmony way. And then he goes on to say, it's safe to assume that other Indigenous peoples around the world have similar understandings of the harmony way. I have known Indigenous peoples from all around the world who very much relate to this life way. The similarity allows some common ground among Indigenous peoples. We are all Indigenous from somewhere. So what happened? How did the individual become more important than the community? How did competition overtake cooperation? At what point did some civilizations trade knowledge through lived experience and replace its importance with theory? The answers to these and other important questions are complex. Suffice it to say for now, the way back is through the harmony way of living and being. So like how Greg talked about Eve went from human being to human doing. The way back is through one's relationship with the earth and the whole community of creation. And then at the bottom of each of these devotions is a little box of a practice that you can do. And so Woodley says, go outside today and hold the soil in your hands. Imagine yourself as just one of the billions of life forms around you, none more important than the other, but each doing its part to maintain harmony and balance.
That's awesome.
Osheta, can you show that book one more time?
Sure.
And maybe, Dan, we can put it in our description.
Becoming Rooted, 100 Days of Reconnecting with Sacred Earth.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Hey.
Well, I think we've run out of time. Thank you so much, Osheta, for being with us and for sharing all that you did. Good job, Dan. We did it. We made it. Thank you guys for sticking with us. It was probably a little bit longer show today, but totally worth it because Osheta was here. Don't forget to continue to tune in. The sermon series is still going. We're still learning. We're still growing. So tune in on the weekends and then circle back with us as we continue the conversation on the MuseCast, both here and also via podcast. Have an awesome week, you guys.